Welcome to podcast episode number 1 of Crave the Book. And today we're going to be discussing chapters 0 through 3 of Tracy Wolff's Crave series. Today, Amber and I discussed a lot of really interesting plot points, little things that we didn't notice upon our first run through of the series. I think that we covered quite a bit in the first half that is safe and spoiler free if you're picking up the series for the very first time. But then about at the halfway point, we start getting into some of the things that tie back into later books, such as Crush and Covet. So make sure that you listen for that spoiler alert if you are new here. That way you can kind of stop before we divulge any secrets of this book series, and enjoy, guys. And we hope that you'll subscribe to the podcast and listen to future episodes as well. But for now, let's jump in. All right, guys, this is episode 1 of Crave the Book because we're craving the Crave series. We've spent a lot of time trying to think of that name, didn't we, Amber?
We did.
So we were like, okay, is this cringy or is this a great title? So guys, welcome. This is episode 1 where we're going to be discussing chapters 0 through 3. And Crave is the first series that I've ever read that has a chapter 0. So I thought that was really interesting. So we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the things that happen in those chapters. And Amber, she's got a little memo to our new listeners. Obviously, you're all new unless you're watching this way after it was recorded. But Amber, want to lead us into our memo?
So we're going to spend the first half of the podcast talking about chapters 0 to 3, just to kind of give some sort of structure to our series of podcasts. But then after that, we will actually give you a spoiler alert. So that section, the second section of the podcast, will be for anybody who has read all 3 of the series or the whole book, like for the first book, the second book, whatever. If you wanted to have that just social conversation with somebody who has already read the books, our sort of theories, our ideas of how the series is going to progress, that is what we're going to be discussing in the second half.
Yes, because we want to make sure that if you guys want to do like a read along where you're inspired to read because of the podcast, we're not spoiling the series because it does start out a little bit slow. To be perfectly honest, the first book is my least favorite. I think Amber agrees.
Yes.
But we want to make sure that if you're reading the series along with us as we're discussing, that we're not spoiling anything for you. So we'll make sure to try to not give any spoilers until we give that notification that anybody who hasn't read the full series needs to go ahead and retreat and wait until next week's episode. But before we get into that, since this is our very first episode, let's go ahead and get some introductions out of the way because it's very obvious that Amber and I have completely different accents. So, Amber, do you want to tell them a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Amber. I am from Hampshire in the United Kingdom, a little city just about 20 minutes away from Stonehenge, and about an hour away from London. I'm 28 years old. I run my own business, and Starla and I met through me learning a bit more about Etsy. Because I draw people's pets and I make brand merchandise for different dog breeds, and I needed a little help with my Etsy shop. And then Starla came along and we've been friends ever since. We've been best friends and we've never met in the 4 years we've known each other. We've never seen each other in the flesh. So we use our time, instead of meeting up like normal people, we Marco Polo each other. Which is a great app if you haven't had it already. We read books together now, apparently. And, we have great time just via the digital age. It is great that we can have friendships that are 3,000 miles apart.
Yeah, and we're going to get to meet. So hopefully we have some episodes of the podcast for you guys where we're actually sitting next to each other, because she will be coming to see me in November. But my name is Starla. I am an Etsy coach. I'm sure that there will be a couple of my YouTube subscribers that mosey over and watch the podcast out of morbid curiosity for what Amber and I do in our free time. So apologies to all of you. But I am an Etsy coach. I run several businesses. I am a serial reader, especially after the big Twilight renaissance. I got hardcore back into Twilight, and then I was just hungry for anything that gave me those same feelings. And that's when I picked up the Crave series. I found it just sitting in the bookstore, and like many of you, it kind of had that similar branding to Twilight. So I immediately picked it up and was like, oh, what is this? Is this a Twilight knockoff? And then I kind of, dove into it a bit and realized that I feel like it's more akin to Harry Potter, where you have that little bit of romance, especially in the first book, but I almost feel like it was written in a way where you think that that's what the story is going to be about, and then you get into it and it ends up being just so much more. So I guess that wasn't really a great introduction as to me. That was more me talking about the books. But I don't really do a whole lot in my free time because Amber and I we like to call ourselves business masochists, where everything that we do, it leads back to business. So we decided this is us doing something non-businessy. So hopefully it ends up being fun and you guys enjoy listening to us rant about this series and maybe some other books. But that's introductions, guys. Let's go ahead and dive into some topics. We want to talk about chapters 0 through 3 of the book because we are rereading the series. I think that I picked up the books because, like I said, it was very much Twilight-esque. And then I read the whole series and I immediately messaged Amber. I was at the end of Covet, and I won't give anything away, but you guys know when you get like towards the end of Covet and things start getting real fast. And I messaged Amber and I'm like, this book series is stressing me out so bad. You have to read it. And she was like, fine, I'll read it. And then she read the first book. And Amber, what was the first book like for you? Because I know that you weren't hooked when you read the first book. It took you a little while.
It did. And I think that if I was 14, 15 years old again, I would have loved it. Mm-hmm. It would have been my favorite book. I think being the age that we are, because we're both the same age, reading the first book of Crave, it does come across as a very, very teenage fiction book.
Absolutely.
So it was quite hard to get through, but my love of books means that I can never leave a book not finished. And you were raving so much about the second and the third book that I was just thinking it was kind of like, the pilot episodes for TV shows where you're just going to go, okay, there's an introduction to the characters, there's an introduction to the world, and the concept behind like the lore of the world. And I found myself sort of understanding the characters but wanting more growth from them, and we definitely got that through Crush and Court, I think. So it wasn't my favorite book, but now going back through it, I'm finding that because I've already read the series, there are nuances and there is foreshadowing and there are things like that is so much more enjoyable to read back through the second time.
Yeah, it's very rereadable. So if you're new to the series, and you're in that same boat where, you're a little bit older, maybe you've got that life experience. I think that when you're a little bit older and you start seeing how Jaxon is acting, especially in the chapters that we read, chapters 0 through 3, where he's just kind of doing that broody, angsty, mean for no reason. And I mean, he has a reason, but there's really, it doesn't matter how much you're trying to protect a girl. There's no reason to be that mean. That's how Edward Cullen was. And I think that, we've got it in our heads when we're young that is acceptable behavior, that is attractive. The guy who's very mean, but then he starts to like you, but then he's still mean to everybody other than you, and I mean, that's a trope, right? And it's fun and it's addicting, and I love reading books like that. That is my favorite character trope. I was all for it in 50 Shades. I was all for it in Twilight. I was all for it in these books. But when you're a little bit older, I think that you realize that that is not a good type of relationship. If it's your guilty pleasure, then that's great. But I think that that's why it was really hard for me to read at first, where I was like, man, y'all just need to communicate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there was even a bit in chapter 3 where she touches his face. And you're like, who does that? Who does that with a stranger? And I was like, I don't understand. This is so strange. But it is all, rereading it again makes so much more sense.
Right, because reading it the first time, it is strange because there's no reason behind it. And we won't go into the spoilers until the last half, but it seems like all of the weird things that happen, there is a reason, but it's a slow burn. Tracy did a really good job of giving you a lot of clues and a lot of hints, and some of the hints are very obvious. For example, when Macy and Grace are first on the snowmobile on their way to Katmere Academy, when Amber and I were doing our reread and taking our notes, Amber, do you have your notes that you took about there's gargoyles, actual gargoyles on the roof?
Yeah. And they're like, well, at least there's not a fire-breathing dragon at the gates and things like that. It was great foreshadowing. It was very throwaway foreshadowing, though. So It was almost deliberately giving the reader some form of clue of what to expect from the book. So you immediately knew that there was going to be some magic. That it wasn't going to be a book just about some girl whose parents are dead.
Exactly.
It already gave you those feelings of like mysterious, magical, like there's a Hogwarts type school that she's already introducing. It's this magical castle. I got those feelings of magic straight away, even though you hadn't really told me too much about the book before I started. It made me think, oh, there's more to this than just the teenage romance.
Yeah. And you know, if this book was just about the romance, I don't think I would have been able to stick with it that long, because I mean, I love me a good trashy romance. Don't get me wrong. But you know, I've had that from so many other things, and my expectations with this series, I didn't have any. I started it with the audiobook, and I feel like I really cheated myself out of my first read by doing the audiobook because I wasn't able to give voice to the characters the way that I would have liked to. And rereading it the second time, it's coming off a lot less mean. And I think it's just because the person who recorded the audiobook, she made Jaxon a lot more bitter than I think that Tracy intended him to be, and maybe that's just how I took it. But yeah, overall, I think that if this would have just been a Grace and Jaxon love story through and through, I wouldn't have been as compelled. Similar to if Twilight was just Bella and Edward and you didn't have the love triangle, there wouldn't be as many people just absolutely crazy about it.
No, and to be honest, love triangles have always irritated me. And I think that there's some form of envy and jealousy stemming from that. Like, I've never had two men fight over me. What am I doing wrong? and it does carry on.
Oh, I was going to say, how do you feel about that being a teenager? I'm sure that we were both teens when we read Twilight. How do you think that shaped like your expectations, if it did at all, as a teenager? Did you feel like you were entitled to have your Edward or Jacob? Because I think that that's maybe like where teens are now.
I think that I was expecting true love to occur very, very early. And also that I would know who they were immediately. That they would just come out like a knight in shining armor,
and you
I
touch
would know
their
immediately
face.
who it was. Yeah, I know who immediately they are, and things like that. And to be honest, when I did meet my husband, I was that like bashful little girl who had to message her friend and go like, "Who was that? Who was that? There's a guy in a beard downstairs. Who is it?" But before that, all of the boys and the men that I had dated, if I look back now, we had nothing in common. We didn't really have a reason to continue our relationship. And I think that was me trying to force that love storyline. That I was like, well, I can't fall in love with somebody who I'm not supposed to be with for the rest of my life. When actually you look back and you go, oh, wow. I could imagine me living with them now. It would be a really boring life.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of our listeners are going to hear us talk about Jaxon, because I know that a lot of you guys like Jaxon. I did a poll today. I'll be revealing some of the results from that Jaxon versus Hudson debate. But I think that most of our listeners side with Hudson, but I do feel like those who still are in love with Jaxon, they're very passionately in love with Jaxon. And I just want to be clear that when we dog on Jaxon, it's not because we think he's a bad character or a bad person. I think that Jaxon he's very immature because he is younger than Hudson, and you can feel it. You can see it. And, it's very typical behavior for a young, teenage boy. It's not abnormal. It's just not healthy. So if you hear us talking badly about Jaxon, it's not that we don't like him. It's that you can definitely read the accuracy in which his age is depicted in the choices that he makes and the way he chooses to carry himself. I like to say that Jaxon is like your cute teenage, little high school boyfriend, whereas Hudson is daddy. Like Hudson is he's husband material, and Jaxon is like, that nice fond memory that you had.
Jaxon makes Grace understand and grow and realize what she wants in a partner
and what she doesn't want.
He's not a partner. Mm-hmm. He always looks at her as a vulnerable human who has to be looked after. And that's not what you want to be when you're an adult. You don't want someone to look at you the same way as you would look at as a child. You want to be respected and revered in a way that you're so capable that I want to look after you, but I don't have to.
Exactly. Giving you the choice. I think that's something that a lot of books do, is they take away the choice of the female character, and it makes you feel like that's how it should be, when in reality, that's not what you want. It's fun for a little while, like as a, when you're new in a relationship, and it's really nice to have someone treat you like that until it's not anymore. So,
yeah.
So a couple little things that we wanted to touch on. I know we said that we would stay out of the spoiler zone, and I guess we're kind of dipping into a little bit with...
I don't think that anybody within the Crave series can stay away from the fact that everybody has already mentioned Hudson as such a big character. Like, I feel sorry for anybody who has just been spoiled that, but...
Even you knew.
Yeah, even I knew, and I think that it was too foreshadowed within the book as well. And I was like, there can't be a 4-part without some form of love triangle. And I thought that it was with another character, which we will discover in chapter 4. And if you know who it is, you'll know who it is. But there was this whole time that I was thinking that there can't possibly be 5 books, essentially 5 books without some love triangle.
Oh yeah, no way. But not when it comes to vampires.
No. I also think that there's some part of me that knows that I probably guess too much just from the amount of books I have read. that there's always going to be some familiarities, some similarities between novels because everybody's inspired by other stories. So yeah, I think that sometimes I spoil my own pleasure in reading because I guess too quickly.
Yeah, this one did. I did a lot of that with this series, but then there were a lot of curveballs that it threw at me out of nowhere that I didn't anticipate. And I really liked that. It's like,
same.
You got me. Oh, you fooled me, which doesn't happen very often. So when an author is able to do that, especially in YA, I'm always really happy. So let's talk a little bit more about when Grace first arrives to Katmere Academy, because one thing that I noticed, especially on my reread of the series, is that chapters 0 through 3, Grace has not had a single happy moment or happy thought. She has not had any happiness. There is no joy chapters 0 through 3, which is really understandable, right? Because her parents just died. She is from California. I used to live in California, and I can say it's very, very hot, very nice. You don't have winter in her area of California, and she's being shipped off to Alaska to live with some family that she literally hasn't seen in years. She has not seen Macy in, I can't remember how many years she said. But
since she was little, like, the fact that she still has that favorite color in her head, and she's like, I haven't liked that in years since I was small. So she must have it been a while.
Yeah. And she's lost not just her parents and her home and her friends, but she also talks about things like having to leave her drum set and thinking about another family moving into her old house and living where she lived. And those are things I think about that. I think about like my old houses and where I grew up, and I think about other families. Oh, I bet they're trashing it. I bet they repainted the wall that I painted with my mom, you know. So I feel like those are some really raw emotions, and we don't get any of that happiness from Grace because she's so shut down. And I feel like this is a really good example of Grace's low, where normally when you read a book, it starts with the character not being at their lowest, but not being at their highest, and then they hit their low later in the story. With this book, I feel like Grace starts at her lowest.
Yeah.
And is able to grow.
I mean, from a Brit's point of view as well, I think that looking at where she travelled from to where she travelled to, I had absolutely no concept of the magnitude of that journey. I mean, I think the furthest I've ever travelled within my own country, the furthest I've ever travelled is probably about 5 hours from, so I live near Stonehenge, near Salisbury, and I've travelled to Newcastle, which is about 5 hours. That is the longest journey I have ever done in my own country. And then looking at the journey that she has to make because she can't go anywhere else would take 51 hours. And that just to me is insane. And then looking at where Healy is on a map as well, she's going from San Diego, which I'm imagining is very built up. I mean, you would probably be able to confirm that it's got a lot of conveniences.
Oh yeah,
it's got everything. And then she's moving to this place in the middle of nowhere where it's so remote and isolated that you don't have any of your normal comforts, and you're cold. I mean, like I felt sorry for her. I was like thinking like, oh my goodness, like, you're moving from everything that you've ever known, but also everything that you would find easy. And then she's moving to somewhere in the middle of nowhere where she doesn't know enough about the temperature to even know that her eyes don't freeze. Like, she's that innocent and that ignorant of what it's like to live there that she doesn't know why she's being given a scarf and a helmet and what to expect. Yeah. She's starting new in a completely different environment, and I think that that's a great like starting location for also discovering a whole new world within like the magic and the arcane. So I think that it was quite fun to read about the complete sort of like 180-degree flip of everything that she's ever known, and then suddenly she's being thrown in at the deep end to someone completely different. I mean, at least in Forks, for Bella, it was literally, it's just a little bit rainy.
Right, and the thing about Bella is she was able to, she could go to school, she could go home, she could go, out with Jessica, there were things that she could do, but when we're talking about Katmere Academy, if you walk outside for too long, you freeze to death.
Yes.
You're stuck in your school. Can you imagine just being stuck in your school to the point where you don't really go outside very much because it's so cold, and when you do, it's a chore. You have to pack on the layers. I live in Ohio, and it does get bitter cold here, but not so cold that I think that I would die if I didn't have enough, if I didn't put on all 6 of my coats.
No.
And
the only person that she knows there is Macy and her Uncle Finn, who she's not seen in, I'm going to say, maybe 10 years. I mean, based on their ages, Grace says that she's 17 and Macy is a year younger at 16. And what age are you when you have like hot pink as your favorite color? Like, I'm talking like 8, maybe 6 even.
Yeah, she couldn't even recognize her.
No, that's a decade of not knowing who you're now going to live with. I mean, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, and
my anxiety would be so through the roof.
And Grace is very anxious. Like, that's one thing that we know about her. She's anxious. She's a little bit more introverted. She has panic attacks, which Amber and I both are very anxious individuals, so we could really feel, reading Grace's character. Even though we don't always agree with the choices that Grace makes throughout the story, I feel like we can definitely connect to the feelings that she goes through. And one of the things that really stuck out through the second read is how Grace just makes that conscious choice not to tell Macy that she doesn't like pink. And I played the Crave, the little Crave like read through game on the Chapters app. It's really fun if you don't want to reread the first book and you just want the dialogue, because it literally strips everything from the book other than the dialogue and you get the most important parts. But if you don't want to pay for like gems, you just make Grace be like the meanest character ever. And I remember making the choice. I could either pay to tell Macy that, thanks, I love the pink, or you could not pay for the gems and tell her, oh, thanks, but I don't really like pink anymore. So
the free option was to be an asshole.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Which was always what I had to do, because I wasn't going to invest money into the thing, because I wanted to see it out of curiosity. But with that being said, I've been that version of Grace so many times where somebody's like, oh, I remember this is your favorite thing, or, oh, I think I saw this and it reminded me of you and I thought that you'd love it. And in reality, I hate it. And I love how Grace just throughout the whole book is stuck with hot pink bed.
Everything.
Hot pink coat.
I mean, I do want to touch on the fact that Macy, she always knows what Grace needs. I don't think that there's ever a scene where Macy isn't giving Grace something. Whether it's a scarf, whether it's cookies, whether it's a dance session.
A hug.
She's such a generous character. And I really was expecting her to be like Jessica from Twilight, where there's always some point where she's really just annoying and you want to be left alone. But Macy is such a genuine, like, warming character throughout. Even in, like, her darkest moments, like, towards the end of Crush, she's so vibrant and so genuine, and I'm so glad that there is finally a best friend who is like that in a book.
Yeah.
And it's not like my absolute worst nightmare of a roommate.
Yeah, I think that Macy's the best possible thing that could have happened to Grace in that time period. And I also think that she tells Grace what she needs to hear. She never like BS's Grace. She always says exactly what she needs to hear, even if it's not what Macy would choose for herself. There's all those points where Grace, you know, she needs a hug, she gets the hug, but then she needs to pull away. And I think that that's a really special thing where you have a friend who knows exactly what you need for yourself. And I hope that everybody has a friend like that. Amber's my friend. But,
I know that when you don't want to talk to me and I send loads of messages and you're like, well, she'll reply one day. It's fine.
We'll go through one of those depressive episodes where you just can't talk to anyone. But Amber knows that if I disappear for an extended amount of time, it's because I'm sulking somewhere, but I will return.
I also like the fact that even though Macy might not have any concept of what anxious feelings that Grace is going through, she does tell her to chill out and stop, and Grace actually listens. I don't know how many times you've done it, but I've definitely done it where I forced myself through a panic attack to do something that the panic attack was being triggered by, just so that I look like a normal person. But in fact, it actually makes you look the complete opposite. It makes you look insane.
Right.
Because, and I think one of the things that Grace had to kind of understand is that she wasn't invulnerable, that she didn't have to not grieve, that she could go through that process with Macy of being vulnerable. And it was really nice to see that despite the fact that Macy hadn't seen her in over a decade or whatever we decided as the time frame, that she wasn't so needy of a cousin that she's like, no, you need to spend time with me. We need to do this. We need to catch up on everything that I've missed over the last 10 years. She was very much giving Grace her own space, despite the fact that they were living in the same room together, which was nice to see. It was an example of a very healthy best friend relationship, which was really nice to read. It wasn't exhausting.
Yeah.
To sort of understand, like, oh, just she's always there. She won't ever leave Grace alone. And when you read a book, you always try and step into the shoes of the main character. And when you get annoyed with the other characters in the books, it's because you're looking at it through Grace's eyes. You're understanding, like, oh, this person's really annoying me. This person's really giving some red flags, and I feel uncomfortable. I never get that with Macy. I am never suspicious of her at any point. Were you?
No, not at all.
No, not even a little bit.
And I was suspicious of a lot of other characters later that ended up not being bad either. There was nothing wrong with them, but just because they were so nice, I was suspicious. Too nice. Exactly. And Macy's definitely too nice, but she's nice in a different way. I mean, Leah was too nice, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in probably episode 2. But there's a lot of characters that are also just as nice, but you feel icky. They make you feel icky inside, and you can't quite tell why. But that's your intuition speaking. Mm-hmm. And I think that Grace has a lot of moments where her intuition talks. And
she doesn't listen.
She acknowledges it. She's like, oh, yeah, well, this made me feel this way, but it's probably nothing. No, you should trust your first instincts, girl, because, there's a lot of things that she probably could have prevented if she would have listened to her intuition. So pivoting to the end of our non-spoilery discussion, and then for all of you who are still early in the books, you can scoot out so we don't ruin anything for you, because I have some juicy things that I want to talk about that tie into Covet. But let's talk about Jaxon and that first encounter. Amber, what was your first impression of that initial chessboard? Just the dialogue, the encounter, the face touching. How did it make you feel?
So uncomfortable. so uncomfortable. And I wasn't sure whether it was deliberately trying to make me uncomfortable, because it was quite a tense scene. I mean, there's a guy that you've never seen before, and he is completely fronting you. He is making you feel unwelcome. He is making you feel like you need to leave. He is telling you things, and it is the first swear word of the book, and it's very early. I mean, chapter 3, the first swear word. And then you're like, okay, it's going to be one of those books. It was very uncomfortable. And then reading back through Jackson's point of view at the end as well, he was just as uncomfortable doing it. It was nice to read that, like, it wasn't just him being an absolute knob. It was, he was deliberately trying to put it on. He was trying to mask his own sensibility to the fact that she was human and that she was vulnerable. He was trying to make sure she was safe and protected, which is all he has ever done, even though he hadn't experienced the mating bond with her or anything, which I want to talk about. Come on.
Oh, yeah.
Mating bonds. Seriously. He didn't react at all, even through the first read and the second read, during Grace's portrayal of the scene. He just stands there. He says, "You really confuse me.
I don't understand you."
Like, okay, that's his reaction to the mating bond. Yeah, so it makes me think that maybe he wasn't even really aware of what that was, because he wasn't expecting it so early.
Yeah.
Or he wasn't expecting it at all. That he didn't feel like he was deserving of love because of what he had done.
And what he had gone through. And how he was raised. So I feel like everything, I mean, when you read it, what you're supposed to feel and what the author is trying to give you, obviously, is, you know, oh, he's so, like, Grace fixates on his looks, but she also says, I'm not going to be the girl who, you know, falls for...
The damsel in distress.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm not going to be that girl. I'm not going to be the protagonist in the YA novel. But she totally does, because she looks at him, and then she lets him get very, very close, which that's something that it's not a good thing. I know that when we read it, it's like, ooh, it's tense, it's exciting, he's intimidating, he's in my personal space. But just for the FYI, I'm sure that you guys all know this, but when a person, I'm not gonna say a man because that's not appropriate.
Could be anyone.
Anyone. If somebody, a person that, even if you find them attractive, if they perform the act of trapping you, which is where they physically use their body to block you into a space where you are not able to move in either direction, that is not a good sign. And it's something I think that our older readers will know. Like, if you go to a bar or a club, I think that the drunk guys will tend to do that, where like they'll like try to get you next to the bar, up against the back of the bar, where they come over and talk to you, and there's like a bar stool on each side of you so you can't comfortably get away. But that's a common thing that you see, and it's something that makes you very uncomfortable when it actually happens to you. When you read it, it's a little bit different, but this just isn't something that is normal, right? This behavior that Jaxon is displaying, and it's, I would say that for his age, I mean, he's obviously a lot older because he's a vampire, but assuming his brain is still a teenage boy, it makes total sense to me. Is it right? No. But the behavior isn't weird to me, because that isn't something that I think a lot of people, you know, I would say a lot of people aren't really aware of when they're doing it, if they're not doing it intentionally. And whether or not Jaxon was intentionally trying to get her trapped back in that corner and scare the life out of her, I mean, I understand he is trying to spook her.
He's being predatory.
Yeah. It's a very weird interaction. And then Grace, it really shows her character, where she she sees him and she just, even though he's cursed at her, he's told her to get out, he's been just blatantly rude to her.
She sought her out as well. Like,
yeah.
Like, obviously she knew that she was the new girl and that everyone would know her as the new girl because there's only 400 students at this school. So most people would have recognized that she was the new girl. But he acted like she was a target. He made a beeline for her when she was alone. She'd just been left in that room by Macy to go and find her Uncle Finn. So she was on her own and he made a beeline for her, knowing that she was vulnerable. And he played on it. Yeah. He absolutely played on it.
And it was her first interaction with anyone from the school other than Macy. Like, she got to Alaska and it was Macy and then Jaxon.
Yep.
But I think that that whole moment where Grace looks at him and sees his scar, I guess I have mixed feelings here because I always try to tie in the psychology, and I'm definitely a see the good in everyone type of person where I will see someone who does wrong and I will see someone who makes bad choices, and it doesn't necessarily mean that I will, if it's like a friend or someone that I'm close to, it doesn't necessarily mean that I will say, oh, I need to look past these negative things, especially if the negative things are very, very bad. Sometimes it's important to know when to walk away from something that is toxic. But Grace really shows her character in that moment where he's been mean to her, he's cursed at her, he's made her feel unwelcome, and the first thing she does is she's like, oh, this must have hurt, and immediately grabs on to the one little sliver that hit Jaxon right in the heart. Like, it was just a very weird moment that made that entire scene strange. It's definitely strange to read it the first time, but reading it the second time, I think that it makes a lot more sense. And obviously there's a lot of other things that happen behind the scenes that we'll get into in the second half of the podcast. But yeah, I think that the whole just lack of personal space and things, just little public service announcement: don't touch someone's face. If they have a marring, like, awful scar on their face, don't touch someone's face.
Did you think that the scar was going to be an important point later on in the book at all?
I actually wasn't sure. Honestly, when I first read it, I thought that it was going to be one of those things where it just was, oh, it makes him look so badass. This is the physical identifier that he is the mean boy who has eyes for only you. It's the sign that points down, like the marquee, the blinking marquee that says, I'm the bad boy, but we're going to have a love interest.
So we've spoken about the conversation, but there were a few things about the chessboard that I'm really intrigued by. And I'm like, okay, firstly, I want to know whether the pieces that Grace picks up, whether they symbolize anything. Because she picks up a vampire first, doesn't she?
Yeah, it was a vampire,
dragon, sleepy dragon, and then vampire queen. And I'm wondering whether the order, kind of like a tarot card reading, where she picks up a random item. Because she had the choices of, what is it? Is it 64? Is it 64? No. There's 64 squares, but there are 16 chess
different pieces,
aren't there? And out of all of those, she chose those 4. And I'm just wondering whether that's something that's going to come and bite us in the ass later.
We could just be reading the chicken bones here.
Oh, absolutely. And there are a few things that, like, because you're reading it through the second time, there are a few things like Uncle Philip. Like, who is he? He must be special. He must have some kind of superpowers, because Grace even notes that he picks up her suitcases like they were nothing, and that he was physically strong. And he is Macy's uncle, which I'm assuming is Uncle Finn's brother, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I'm a little confused about that as well, because that would mean that Grace's dad is Finn's brother, and Macy refers to Philip as Uncle Philip. It's very confusing. We're gonna have to keep our eyes on Philip, because
yeah,
I'm not
he's
sure.
He has to come back, right? That there's he's not been mentioned since.
No.
And the other character that we need to we've had many theories throughout. It was Macy's mother, was that she can't have just walked away. Like I was half expecting her to be in the prison, in Covert. That I genuinely thought they're going to find Macy's mother there, because what kind of mother who acts like that? And I think that there was a line, it literally said, like, how could Mother of the Year just disappear? She'd just walk out one day and didn't want to come back. So I think that Macy's mum is going to make a reappearance at some point as well. I'd love to hear everyone else's theories as well. It's the characters that have like a single scene of a mention and then we never hear about them again. Either Tracy is just putting them in there to sort of tell the story, or they are not just throwaway characters, that they exist in the world somewhere else and they are having their own story playing out at the same time, and we're going to discover what has been happening.
And I'm very curious to see if we're holding on to them for a reason, because they stay in my head. Like, I remember them, and especially rereading, I'm like, oh yeah, this guy with the plane. But who knows, it might also be one of those cases where, I mean, I've got like Uncle Bill, Dad's friend. Oh, he's not really your uncle, but we just call him Uncle Bill,
okay. Yeah, you've got that like sort of family friend vibe.
Exactly. So it could be something like that, because it's not like did they say whether Phil, he has to live in Alaska, because Macy says that her dad is going to take a case of beer to Philip, and they're going to watch the game together. So he has to live close.
Have a bro date.
Yeah, the little bro date. So he has to live in Alaska. It's very confusing. So I'm really hoping that we get a little bit more of him in the last book. I'd
love to know if Tracy is just listening to this and going, "Oh, I forgot all about it."
Crap, we need to make a spin-off about Philip.
He was no one. And we're just biting onto like the smallest morsel of information.
That's fun though. That's got to be fun. I'm also writing a book series, and Amber read it, and she read the first one, and feeling a reader go through a maze that you've deliberately set and you've misled them. I loved hearing what she thought was going to happen and then it just being completely wrong. It's like setting up your little maze for your mouse, and the mouse goes down the wrong path and doesn't get the cheese. It's very entertaining.
I also gave you my input at the end, and I'm like, I thought that I'd read it in a completely different way to the way that you had meant it. And then you're like, oh, I didn't even realize that was an option. And then you wrote it into the second one. And I'm like, yay! But I had input.
We should have started this podcast earlier, because then we could have influenced maybe how we wanted Court to go. Or we say how we want it to go, and then Tracy writes it the other direction just to keep us guessing.
Well, so far, like, Crush and Covert. I don't think Covert could have been better.
Oh, it was beautiful.
I don't think that Covert could have been better. So I am expecting no pressure, Tracy, but I'm expecting very, very high things with Court. I'm so excited for it because of the way that it was left in Covert. It was such a good cliffhanger. Whereas at the end of Crave, I felt there was more of a cliffhanger the penultimate chapter, and that was when I bought the second book. That was when I was like, okay, I'm invested. And then I read the final chapter, and then I was like, oh no. Why did I read the final chapters? Because now I just want to reread the first book again. Because I'm like, oh, how did I miss this? How did I miss all of these sort of nuances? Like, when did you get the idea that Grace was not human?
I guess I kind of, you want to go ahead and skip to get rid of our non-spoiler audience? And then,
I mean, we can do. Yeah. I mean, this is way past the first half.
yeah. Okay. So everybody.
So this is spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
Yeah. If you have not read chapters past chapter 3 of Crave, you can go ahead and go. Otherwise, we're going to ruin the book for you, and we don't want that. And we will cover the series episode by episode, so you're not missing out. Just tune in next week. All right. Assuming everybody is gone. Okay. Assuming everybody is gone, I actually had the reveal of Grace being a gargoyle kind of spoiled for me. So I kind of knew...
Specifically being a gargoyle?
No, not specifically being a gargoyle. Just that... So, the Bookish Box is releasing their limited edition set of the books with the new covers. And it was the cover reveal of Crush, where there's a silhouette of Hudson standing behind Grace, and Grace has these big, huge, like, baddish wings. And I didn't think gargoyle. I thought dragon, because
demon.
Yeah, demon. Gargoyle was not where my mind went. And when Amber read that, she's like, she's a gargoyle? What's she gonna do? Stand there?
Statue her to death.
Which was what I thought too. I thought that her there's vampires and there's dragons, and dragons can fly and breathe fire, and vampires, they can levitate, and Hudson can blow things up, and then there's gargoyles, they can turn into rock. So
I'm wondering whether I can Google it, but what are gargoyles for?
Yeah. Sentries. They
are water spouts. They help rainwater flow away from buildings' walls. So I mean, yes, she could absolutely, maybe she can channel water.
Yeah. And
so, I mean, that would have made sense, but there was so many things that she could do as a gargoyle that did not come from what I was expecting her to be able to do.
It was a lot cooler than what I thought it was going to be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I love the fact that Tracy went weird. That she didn't just go for one of the 4. Or one of the 10 possible things that it could be. Like, oh, you're a mermaid. And you're like, oh. Like, I wasn't disappointed. I was conflicted, confused, and intrigued. Like, I was like, wait, what's this gonna be? It wasn't any one of the tropes that was already, like, low-hanging fruit.
Right.
It was an interesting choice, and I think that probably made me want to read it more. Was because I was like, what is she possibly going to do with this? Because she had already flipped dragons on their head as well. Like, I wasn't expecting the way that dragons were going to be in this world to be like that either.
Ooh,
where they were human.
Here's a good one that ties in, and I don't think I've asked you this outside of the book. Here's a curveball question. Or outside of the podcast, I mean. What did you feel about Flint and the clues that Tracy wrote in, where he, for example, he was wearing a dragon hat in one scene? Did you suspect that he was a dragon? Because I did not. I mean, I started to kind of believe it, but it took me a while.
I guessed it. I guessed that he was a dragon straight away, but at the same time, I was second guessing myself because he was still humanoid. I was thinking, like, how is she going to write in a dragon? Maybe dragons aren't dragons as we know them. But then it turns out it's like their alter ego, isn't it? But I thought out of everyone in Catmere, he was the only one that was actively almost trying to get her to guess.
Yeah.
And now we know what Flint was trying to, and absolutely no hate towards Flint whatsoever. He is one of the best characters ever. It was the fact that within this book, he was a bit of a knob.
Oh, yeah.
I'm now not sure whether the reason why he was trying to get her to guess and understand that it was a magical world was to physically put her in more harm and put her in the way of danger more, so he didn't have to be the one to hurt her.
I don't think he wanted to hurt her. I think you're right. I think that because there was a point where he advises her, he's like, don't go out on your own. Like, you need to not go out on your own. You need to, he warns her several times. And I think that he knows what he has to do. He knows what has to be done. But
he's fighting against himself every step of the way.
Right. Because I don't think he wants to do it. He's such a great character. He's one of, I mean, honestly, he's probably my second favorite character in the whole book. Everybody knows who my favorite is, but
it's Uncle Phil, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love Uncle Phil. A couple other little things that I wanted to touch on is I noticed in my reread where Jaxon was standing in the window where Grace first arrives to Katmere Academy, and she looks up, but she says that she feels a pang of disappointment when she sees the figure disappear. And we all know that that was Jaxon, and if you didn't know, then it's in the bonus chapters where it talks about him looking at her. But I wonder if she feels that pang of disappointment, because I wouldn't feel disappointed if I saw a creepy shadow looking up, up above, watching me. I'm wondering if that pang of disappointment is that mating bond starting to form, where they are just destined to be drawn together for that like really cataclysmic moment. Because I mean, obviously if you've read all the books, you know that the Bloodletter and Grace's parents organized their whole thing. I mean, they did have the ability to choose, but there was also a little bit of magic taking place. And I wonder if that pang of disappointment that she felt was the first little clues of the mating bond, or if it was just Grace like, oh, there might be a friend. Oh no, friend gone.
Well, I kind of have imagined the mating bond to be kind of like a magnet.
Yeah.
That like you are drawn to each other. Because I don't think that the mating bond would have worked if they weren't suited to each other anyway. And I think that if Hudson had not come along, they would have been perfectly happy together. I mean, it would have been a really toxic relationship, but it's not like they hated each other. It was not like they weren't suited for each other. And Grace wouldn't have gone through the growth that Hudson would have pushed her to. So it would, yeah. I feel like maybe it was like that magnet's first. You know, when you put a magnet, they're quite far away from each other, but the moment that they've reached that distance where they then start to pull together,
they quiver.
I feel like that might be that moment.
Yeah.
But then it wasn't like she was immediately attracted to him in the magnet sense, not the physically attracted way, when they met at the chessboard. But the cataclysmic event of them like sharing that mating bond was not something that Grace obviously had no concept of it. She didn't immediately know, oh wait, there's something that has now tied us together forever.
But she did keep thinking of him that night. Like,
yeah,
he was on her mind nonstop after it happened. And,
well, it would be for me because he was terrifying.
Right. But she was thinking of him like, he's so scary. I hate him, but he's so sexy.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, like, is that something that maybe that was the first inklings of the false mating bond? Is that they were just seeing each other for the physical attractiveness? They weren't sharing the the thing that Hudson and Grace do is that they pull on the mating string, and they can sort of ebb and flow between each other. They know each other so intimately that they can feel the other one wanting their attention, or passing along signals of warmth and comfort along the mating bond. But Jaxon and Grace never do that, even when she is aware of the mating bonds there.
Yeah.
Like after the laundry room, she knows where the strings are.
Yeah.
And she never reaches out for it. Not that I remember, anyway.
No, and I mean, she sends him, like, energy, but it's not, Jaxon and Grace's relationship, to me, it's like...
codependent.
Yeah, it's almost like looking into, like, a murky puddle, where, I mean... Yeah, there's a little bit swirling around in there, but it's not very deep. There's not a whole lot of substance to it. Whereas with Hudson, there's so much more underneath the surface that you get those little clues and just small little things, small moments where Hudson really shows that he cares about her in a way that is very, very different. And I mean, I'm treading into crush territory here, which we'll discuss more once we get to those books later on. But there are just so many moments where Jaxon, he's not empathetic. And for example, when Grace has Hudson in her head and she's very bitter about it and she's so frustrated and she's literally, I mean, for those who have anxiety, you know what it's like to go through a panic attack and need silence. You need quiet. You need a dark room with no sound.
Breathing space.
Exactly. And feeling like you have someone who is just snarking nonstop in your head, sifting through every single thought that you have, and you can't even think without someone seeing it. And then Jaxon being like, well, you talk to Hudson more than you talk to me. That is such a terrible thing to say to someone who is going through something so traumatic.
He's like, yeah, you're clearly distracted. I can see that you're enjoying talking to Hudson more than you are me. And I'm like, yeah, but this guy is literally in my head. I can't escape him. I can't walk away from a conversation. I can't get a word in edgeways. And even if I'm trying to listen to you, I have to concentrate so hard on what you're saying to drown out what Hudson is saying that it doesn't make the conversation enjoyable anymore. It's not as free and it's not as easy as it was in the previous book, because there is another person here. There is another person trying to, and it was absolute subterfuge as well. He was not only stopping them enjoying a conversation with each other, but he was also stopping them having their intimate moments and their privacy.
Yeah.
What did you think once he had started? Did you immediately know that it was because he loved her and he was like that, or he was uncomfortable with seeing his brother kissing another girl? Like, ew, you guys are gross.
It took me a while, actually. It took me probably longer than it took you, because you knew that I was already swooning for Hudson when you started reading the series, so you knew that there was something up. But I was very untrusting of Hudson for quite a while, actually. And I went through that mental conundrum of, ooh, what is the right thing to do? Should they just let him out with all of his power? He says that we can trust him, but I don't know. Like, I actually wasn't sure up until the moment when Grace was like, you know what, I need to just let him out. Like, I am going to have to just let him out with his power, which was ultimately the thing that saved her at the end of Crush, because if she hadn't have done that, she wouldn't have even won the Ludares tournament to begin with.
Oh, she would have got smooshed.
She did get smooshed.
I also think that there was something about the fact that Hudson reacted so righteously and angrily whenever anybody accused him of being evil. It was never a convincing moment. So, like, you convince someone that you're innocent, you're probably guilty. But if you keep if you react to the fact that somebody is saying that you're not innocent, it brings that home that maybe there's something that you need to listen to about what he's saying. That people can spread lies, and also there are three sides to every story. There's your side, my side, and then there's the truth. And no one was seeking the truth. They were only ever looking at how they had experienced Hudson.
That's true.
And that what they had understood and what they had been told about Hudson. No one had thought, oh, actually, he had probably got the worst childhood that anybody had ever had. Because as much as Jaxon said that he hated his mother, his father is quite obviously the worst out of the pair. And Hudson was the one that had to live with him. And everybody just assumed that living with him would have turned him, would have made him become a monster, would have made him evil. Instead of maybe living with him had been the worst torture of anyone's life, and that sometimes the things that he's done are probably justified.
Right. And, I'm not saying that we're going to find out some big, revelation in the next book, because I really hope not. But I feel like there's a little bit more to Jaxon, just so he passionately did not want Hudson to come back. Mm-hmm. There was a burning passion there. It was like a to hell with that. No way, under no circumstances. And
I'm not even sure whether half of that was because, well, he's been privy to my girlfriend's intimate thoughts. Like, maybe there is a way that he could manipulate the situation even more, is that when he is out and he has his powers, he probably will have Grace on his side.
Yeah, because he has that power to convince. Yeah.
And that he'd already done whatever he had done to Grace, because he did believe that Hudson was sort of pulling Grace's strings throughout. And he probably thought the moment that Grace set him free, or that they set Hudson free, that he wouldn't just have to fight his brother, that he would have had to have fought through his girlfriend to get to him.
I was really grateful for the scene, the bonus chapter, at the end of Covet, where we got that moment with the wooden horse.
Yes.
And them kind of being able to bond like brothers and go on their run. I think that it signifies the end of their battle with each other. And I think that the next book is going to be focused on them being brothers. Exactly.
Again, yeah. And I think that as a brother as well, all Jaxon ever says about Hudson is that he's evil, he's manipulative, he's deceptive, he lies, he cheats his way through everything. Whereas Hudson, the only descriptive words that he uses towards Jaxon are that of describing a teenager, of childish,
wanker,
impudent. Like, they were never judgments of his character. They were only judgments of his behavior.
That's true.
He was a big brother looking at his little brother, just saying, "You're acting very childish. The way that he described him was never in an evil way. It was never in a demeaning way. It was only ever a big brother looking at a little brother. The way that Jaxon describes Hudson was as if he was like spawn of Satan.
Like he deserved to die.
Exactly. And I think that that's probably what tipped me off about Hudson telling the truth, was that if he was evil trying to convince Grace that he wasn't, he probably would have convinced her that Jaxon was not good for her in the most deceptive and demeaning way. Not, he is a child. He everything that he did was very eye-rolling, very, like, taking the piss, joking around, like, he got you meat. Like, things like that. Like, it was always like a judging of him being a boyfriend, not judging his character or his personality.
Yeah. And I think that I think that it's one of those things where Hudson still cared for Jaxon, even though, I mean, his brother literally killed him. And I would like to know more about like exactly what happened. And I hope that we learn that. I want to know exactly how that unfolded.
You want the juicy deets.
I want the juicy deets. I want the moment by moment of Jaxon killing Hudson because I want to know. So we have a couple really cool things going on my Instagram, which most of you are probably watching this after following me on Instagram. I have the Crave series aesthetic page. It's aesthetic, not aesthetics. But all of the polls and fan questions and things that you guys want us to talk about, I will be getting those comments through the Crave series aesthetic page. So if you're not following that, make sure that you do that, and check my stories each week for different things that we're going to be talking about during the podcast, when the episode is going to air, and I will usually do questions and polls. But I asked a couple different questions today that I want to go over. One of them was, what are your guys' favorite scenes in Crave? That was our question to you this week. So, Amber, I'm going to read through some of these, and you let me know how their favorite scenes affected you, and if you like these scenes or if you thought that these were crap scenes, because there's plenty of scenes in Crave that I didn't like.
Okay.
Not because they weren't written well, it's more that I was just like, ugh, Jaxon being a jerk. All right. Okay, so this is a good one. Quite a few people have said jokes between Grace and Jaxon.
Okay.
So
I mean, the dad jokes were right up my alley, if I'm honest. I'm very much a pun lover. So they were really funny, despite them being super cringy. But in my opinion, I feel like it was the one thing that Jaxon could kind of grab onto as something that he could share with Grace. It was something that he was like, oh, Grace enjoys these, so therefore I'm going to bombard her with them, rather than it actually being part of their relationship. So Hudson actually makes her belly laugh as his jokes, whereas Jaxon is he just sends her really awkward jokes, and
he tries to do he tries to do what she does. Like, he tries to just mirror what she's doing, whereas Hudson is a little bit more inventive.
Yeah. And it was really sweet, and like listening to them, it was really cute. But then the moment that Hudson comes along and his actual humor is making me snort laugh through the book, because I really did. I belly laughed. I snort laughed. I giggled throughout the next book. Like, Crush had me in the feels at every page. Whereas Crave, there were the awkward sort of jokes. But if you notice, Hudson and Grace never even really bother with the stupid jokes, because they already have enough humor.
That's true.
It's something that she has with Jaxon, and it fades to nothing.
But they can keep that too. That's a cool thing about it, is that as friends, they can keep that if they want to.
Yeah, it's quite innocent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, Julie said the scene where Jaxon sends her a copy of Twilight.
I'll let you take that one.
Oh, God. That self-awareness. Tracy just knew. She knew that she came into this industry right at the right time. The books came out 2020. First book came out 2020, 2019, 2020. And that beautiful self-awareness where she knew that the reader probably picked up the book because it looked a little bit like a Twilight book. It was beautiful. I cringed and I laughed. So I cringed in the best possible way, where he literally used Edward as a warning. I just beautiful. Chef's kiss. Mwah. Let's see. Every Grace and Macy scene. So I think we touched on that enough at the beginning. Team Macy.
Yeah, she's the best friend that anybody could ever want or need.
Absolutely. Most people said Dancing in the Northern Lights. How did you feel about that scene?
I think that it was all style, no substance. That sounds mean. That sounds really mean. But it is the kind of thing that a teenage boy would try and do as a romantic gesture. That he would be like, oh, I know what she'll love. But it wasn't because Grace would love it. It was because any girl would love it.
I mean,
if that makes sense.
She did make it a point to say that, like, she loved the Northern Lights. Her dad painted the Northern Lights on her wall. Mm-hmm. Like, she was trying to find them when Mark and Quinn tossed her out in the snow. Like, I get that. But if I had a choice between going and Dancing in the Northern Lights with Jaxon versus dancing in the dirty laundry room with Hudson to cell phone music, I'd still, not even just because of the guy, but just because of how it was executed, I would still pick the scene with Hudson. And the music made the scene a lot more real.
And I think the poll sort of mirrored your opinion as well, because you did the poll asking everybody which they would prefer.
Yes, I did.
And the majority said the laundry room.
Yeah, it's like you could literally float into the air and dance in the Northern Lights, or would you rather dance in the laundry room with Hudson? And most of you said dance in the laundry room with Hudson.
I think that if she decided that she wanted to do the dancing in the laundry room again, it would never ever hit the same tone again. It was a once in a lifetime event. Whereas I feel like if she tried to recreate the dancing underneath the Northern Lights with Jaxon, they could do it any night that they wanted. And it wouldn't have had the same impact because you can do it at any point. I know that the Northern Lights is literally, you're only able to see it at certain days and certain places. But ignoring that, can you imagine trying to start the scene to be just as funny the next day in the laundry room? It would just be super awkward. It's kind of one of those jokes where you're like, oh, you just had to be there. It was funny, okay? If I try and like recreate it now, this sounds silly, me saying that I loved being in the laundry room dancing. Never mind. It's okay.
And there's plenty of other books that do that. Bella trying to return to the meadow after her and Edward's like first time there, and it not meaning as much. Granted, Laurent was there and tried to kill her, but you know she tried to like create those feelings, and she couldn't. And even the first elevator scene with Anastasia and Christian Grey, like they have that really spicy moment in the elevator, but then every time they get into an elevator together later in the books, they just like look at each other like like they start laughing about it because they know.
It makes it awkward.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas Hudson could make a date anywhere. He could make anywhere feel just as romantic as dancing underneath the Northern Lights. The fact that he can make a laundry room or even a prison feel safe and warm and as much in love as you can possibly be, then he's the winner.
Absolutely.
And he's the one they're doing everyday thing. I mean, obviously not the prison and the giants and everything.
Everyday things.
They're doing everyday things together because he was in her head for so long. They're doing everyday things, which is what I do with my husband. He can make the mundane feel fantastical, whereas Jaxon is trying to make the fantastical part of her mundane life.
Yeah. Hudson can grill me a grilled cheese any day.
Yeah. I wonder what he put in it. Was it just a grilled cheese? Grilled cheese is such a weird concept for me as a Brit as well.
Tracy, we need answers. What kind of grilled cheese? Okay, so one person said the ending scene for sure, you didn't know what was going to happen. And I'm assuming that she's referring to Hudson.
When she was set in stone?
Yeah, with the sword coming down. Mm-hmm. How did you feel reading that? Because it was a shocker for me.
I knew immediately that Hudson. I don't know why I knew it. I think that it was just the trope of whenever you haven't seen a body, they're probably alive. I I knew that Hudson would make an appearance at some point. I just didn't know when. And I also didn't know that it would be that sudden, and that in the moment of her feeling like her life was kind of back to normal, like just walking through a corridor of a school, and then he just immediately is there with a sword. The sword never recurs again.
No.
He's never seen with a sword. Like, I was like, oh, maybe he's a sword fighter. But no, the sword never appears again.
He should have had an axe, because he likes axes.
He throws axes, yeah. But when she was in Stone and they said that, like, obviously Hudson was missing as well, I was like, I bet she is stuck in the Stone, because they said that she had to come back through choice. And I was like, maybe she doesn't want to come back because she's already in love with Hudson. And then I was like, I've already betrayed everything that Jaxon stands for. But I'm so for it. Because I'm already in love with Hudson, and I've already had, like, 3 lines of what he's been, like, in the book. But I think that dark, mysterious stranger that you know nothing about is very romantic in a lot of people's minds.
Us.
Yeah, so I wasn't anxious about her being stuck in the statue. I was like, oh no, I'm fine. If the whole of the next book is them just being stuck in the statue, I'm for it. I am there. But obviously it wasn't, and we're going to have to wait until, Charm?
Yeah.
Before we find out what actually happened. But yeah, the cliffhanger for me was the bit where Hudson swings the sword. That was the cliffhanger. That was when I bought the book. Then the scene afterwards, where they're looking at Grace and she's set in stone and they talk about her being a gargoyle, that was the bit that I was like, I feel like that should have been the beginning of Crush.
Yeah, it gave you too much. It was...
Yeah, I was like, oh, that like cliffhanger was then sort of almost betrayed by the following chapter. Because I was like, oh, okay, she's a gargoyle. She's set in stone. Okay, cool. Like, not like, oh my goodness, Hudson's swinging a sword, what's going to happen? Like, that's that, like, anxious. But then set in stone and she has to choose to come back and she's apparently with Hudson. I was like, oh, now she's safe, she's happy. We don't need another book.
But we did.
That's tied all the loose ends together for me. Yeah.
We had somebody say that the snowball fight was their favorite. And you know what? I actually didn't like that scene very much. Only because when I was reading it the first time, I was very confused. It was all very, and it made sense afterwards, but I was having trouble visualizing it. The tree scene, yeah. And I liked Flint. It was just, there were a lot of confusing things going on all at once. And I feel like, I don't know what it did to me. It confused me so much that I had no idea what I was supposed to feel. Yeah. I was very confused.
The only thing that I felt was that it was supposed to be a fun... It's like snowball fights are like that magical thing that you do as a child, or as an adult, I suppose. No preconceived ideas about who's going to be in a snowball fight. But yeah, it's supposed to be that fun, magical thing that you do as a child. It reminds you of the holidays. It reminds you of like joy and happiness and like just that winter wonderland kind of feel. And it's kind of like, you know, like water fights where you, despite the fact that you are cold, you are freezing, you've been hit by a snowball and it hurts, you can't stop giggling. And I didn't get any of that from that fight.
No, it was very vicious. It was a very vicious snowball fight.
Yeah, and the fact that all of these supernatural beings knew that they had superpowers and invited a human, or what they thought was a human, they invited this feeble human to their snowball fight. Looking back now, it feels even more, what's the word? Insensitive, like stupid, really not sensible, like reckless, because they have no idea how much they can hurt her. What are they going to do? Pull punches with snowballs for her? Like, I don't, like, yeah, reading back through it, I'm like, wow, like they really could have put her in a really bad place of peril. I mean, the one person that did was obviously Flint, but
he was trying to.
yeah, she could have been really hurt without the fear of being frozen alive. Right. Yeah. I mean, it was a fun scene, but I feel like there was such a note of peril and danger throughout, which was obviously put there on purpose because she was in danger. Someone who was trying to kill her. I don't think that it hit me as one of my favorite scenes.
No,
in fact, I forgot that there was a snowball fight.
I knew something was going to happen. Like, it was one of those things where, like, I didn't get, like, the fun, magical snowball fight vibes. I was very anxious. I'm like, okay, any minute, someone's going to jump out, someone's going to kidnap her, someone's going to try to murder her. I definitely had bad feels the whole time.
Like the tunnel scene as well. The tunnel scene was bad vibes the entire time.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got three more quick points. Jaxon biting the strawberry. I know your feelings about this scene, so I'll let you go first.
That was such a teenage bravado cringy moment for me. Just like he was, and we do find out that he was trying to show off later on, didn't we?
He vomited it back up, didn't he?
Yeah, it backfired on him a little bit. But yeah, I can just imagine a teenage boy trying to do the exact same thing. Obviously not with strawberries, because that's not very, like, masochist, what's the word? It's not very macho. It's very just, yeah, it was cringy for me. And I felt like if I was Grace, I would have just been like, what is he trying to do?
Oh, he needs
is this
a
supposed
bib.
to be intimidating? Is this supposed to be intimidating? He ate a strawberry.
I loved that scene. It was probably I'm so ashamed. No, that was probably my favorite scene of the book. But so when I picture it, because I'm picturing him coming in, sitting down in that winged back, like, elegant chair, and he's wearing a freaking, like, full on black Gucci sweater, which, for those who don't know, that's like a $2,000 sweater. If you're like on the cheap end, Gucci's flipping expensive. So that's like where I was like, ooh, like I had the like when Christian Grey is talking about all of his cars, I was just like, ooh, money. So the teenager in me liked that scene, but I know that if I actually saw it happening and if they decide to do a movie, this could go so bad. I feel like this is one of those scenes that it has to be done just right if they decide to do a film adaptation. Otherwise, it's going to come off like, oh, he takes a bite of something and like I can just like picture like the red juice like dripping down his chin. And if they did it right, they would do like a zoom in, almost like those scenes with like the pupils dilating and everything's really close up and tense. But if they did it like an across the room shot and just like food starts dripping down his face, that's like Grace offering to clean him up after.
Oh, that's one of the worst scenes of my life.
Yeah.
I never felt so embarrassed on somebody else's behalf.
She's busting out the first aid kit. Maybe it's the same thing, but she busts out like her wet nap kit and she goes and like dabs his face. Like, here, you got some shit. You got something on your face here. Let me wash you off.
So uncomfortable.
We'll talk more about the first aid kit in a later episode when that comes to be, because that's my least favorite part of Crave, is just her being so naive, where she's like, "Oh, a vampire is hurt. Let me get my first aid kit." Okay, so one person said that the library scene with Flint,
very marshmallows.
Very confusing for me. I thought that Flint was going to be the love triangle. I was very convinced that Flint was going to be our love triangle. And Flint is obviously gay if you've read the second book. So was he trying to, because he hid the book with I can't remember what the language was, but he hid the book because he was working with Leah and he was doing his research to help Leah to kill Grace. But then Grace comes in, so he hides the book.
I love that she recognized the language as well. He would have been, oh God, oh no.
Right.
What is she? It's like knowing, oh, what does she know now? What can she guess from the fact that I'm reading some ancient manuscript about killing someone?
Right. So maybe him flirting was him trying to distract her and give her something else to think about. Like she would focus on that, and when she thinks of him, like, oh, she's gonna want to know, like, was he flirting? And that's the moment from that encounter that she would transfix on, rather than the thing that he didn't want her to know. Like the flirting might have been a diversion.
Yeah,
because he's really
maybe
smart.
He was trying to like lower her inhibitions a bit and make her feel a bit closer to him. It's like, well, if he's willing to flirt with me and also be willing to wait, because he did say, like, look, if I was coming on to you, you would know about it.
Right.
Maybe he's like, oh, well, I'm flirting with you, but I'm sort of passing up on the fact that Jaxon's still your boyfriend, so I'm not going to overstep any boundaries, but I'm here should you want that boundary to be overstepped.
Yeah, and that's when we look back after Crush, I wonder how uncomfortable that was for Flint, where he's not only trying to kill her because he doesn't want Hudson to come back, and he's trying to... I said he was trying to help Leah. I meant that he was trying to work against Leah and learn the language so that he could stop her from bringing Hudson back. But I wonder... Now my brain is working a little bit harder than... Maybe we'll save this for the Crush episode.
When we reread.
Yes.
As well, yeah.
All right. And then the last scene that we've had a recommendation to talk about, and someone else's favorite scene, they said, when Jaxon whirls Grace around and sinks his fang below her jaw into her neck. I love the description that this person put into it. She said, when Jaxon whirls Grace around, her back to his front, and sinks his fangs below her jaw into her neck. Ooh.
Which time?
Really.
Which time?
I was reading that whole thing, like where she's talking about the pleasure surging through her. I'm like, is this the Big O? Is that what we're reading right now? Is this the vampire equivalent of the Big O? Because I feel like it was.
Yeah, like, I mean, it was pretty much described the same way.
That's how I read it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why they didn't get around to actually sleeping with each other, because she was all take.
Yeah. Forget about Jaxon.
She's like, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm very satisfied.
That's why Jaxon's so angry.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, God. All right. Well, that's all the... I mean, we had a lot of answers, but most of them were the Northern Lights scenes. I think we had... how many people responded? 30-something people responded, and most said the Northern Lights. But I also did one more poll, and just out of morbid curiosity, I wanted to know how many of you are on Team Jaxon and how many are on Team Hudson. So, Amber, do you have any predictions for what they said?
For how I'm going to say majority Hudson, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm going to say 80-20.
No, actually, Jaxon was 25% and Hudson was 75%. Let me, of course I closed the poll out. Let me pop it open and I will tell you exactly how many. So, 37 votes for Jaxon and 112 votes for Team Hudson. So if you guys, don't agree or you have a reason, I would like to hear someone's like full argument as to why Jaxon is the superior in your eyes. So maybe drop me an email at Crave the Book Podcast at gmail.com. And if you've got a really good argument, and I mean, it's got to be convincing. Like Amber and I are big into psychology. We're pretty good at reading characters. I want you to send me an argument that is very convincing that will have me questioning my choice of Team Hudson all the way. And if you give me a really compelling argument, we might present it on the podcast later in the series. And maybe we'll change our minds, but I doubt it because Hudson is daddy.
So is your favorite scene the strawberry scene?
I think that in terms of the scenes that made my heart race, like in a teen romance way, that was definitely it. I love character threats, and that's say hello to my toxic personality.
Oh dear.
My favorite scene in Crush was when Hudson says, "You're going to push me too far one of these days. You know that, right?" And I was just like, "Oh yeah, push him too far, Grace. Push him too far." So, the whole obvious threat, the clear threat, that was probably my favorite little moment in the book. I think that was the one that I enjoyed the most, even though it was very brief.
Yeah.
So, all right, guys, thank you for watching the very first episode. If you haven't already, make sure that you follow us on Instagram at Crave Series Aesthetic. If you're using any of the Crave hashtags, like hashtag Catmere Academy, hashtag Crave Aesthetics, hashtag Crave Book, yada yada, you will inevitably find my page because there are so many posts. And make sure that you check out my Reels section as well, because I've been making a lot of really great music videos for each of the characters. And if you have any ideas for characters that I should do next or scenes, feel free to let me know as well. I just finished up the point of view you're visiting Dragon Court video, and it's so cute. I love doing these little video reels for the characters. Other than that, guys, we should be back next week with chapters 4 through something. I don't really know where we're gonna stop for the next ones. Amber, do you have any a particular scene in mind, or you want to stop?
I really want to get to her first class. So she obviously is suffering from altitude sickness for quite some time. And I think that it would be good to sort of explain what our interpretation of those scenes were when she was kind of laid up in bed and not actually able to do anything. So yeah, I'm kind of excited to do that sort of transition period. So meeting Flint as well, getting to her room, her interactions with Macy, her experiences with altitude sickness, and then classes. And I'm hoping
first interactions with Leah as well, because those are right around the corner. So next episode is going to be full of lots of things. Make sure that you catch up if you haven't read that far already. Hopefully we haven't spoiled too much for you if you haven't read, but we definitely have, because we've covered a lot. But guys, thanks for watching. Make sure that you subscribe to the podcast if you're new here, which hopefully all of you are, because this is our first episode. We're going to be doing these hopefully once a week and covering up until Covet, and then we'll do some more for Court and Charm, and maybe even Remy's spin-off series, which I just found out about yesterday. I love Remy. I'm so excited for those. So, guys, thanks so much for watching. I'm Starla, and this is Amber, and I don't know how to close a podcast. Bye-bye.
Bye.